hot topic is, where have all the clients gone? There's a lot of doom and gloom that's sort of destined for South Africa, and a lot of South Africans talk about it constantly. But I think that depending on what industry you work on, there might be opportunity, and it's not all doom and gloom. And today we're going to talk through that. Today I'm joined by 3 panelists, and I just want to introduce them quickly. So Alexa, the Managing Director of Dogon Group; Andreas Krensel, the Managing Director of IBN; and Cobus Kruger, the co-author of Practice in Offshore Investments. And we're going to start today by sort of giving you an indication on the flows, the Reserve Bank flows in and out of South Africa, in order to touch on some of these topics of South Africans. The first slide we're showing you is the combination of the single discretionary allowance and foreign capital allowance flows in and out of South Africa. This is the Reserve Bank reporting. So this gives you a total flow in and out for the last 6 years, 7 years. We've annualized 2023 to give you an idea of where that should end. And we've compared it to the US dollar rand exchange rate year on year. Traditionally, we've seen a correlation between what the exchange rate does and those flows. But through the years, you see that offshore investment continuously increasing. So my question to you, Cobus, do you think this trend will continue? And how do you see this playing out going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. I do see it continuing, and the reasons for that is, we've seen that if you look at that graph, 2021 was obviously, a great or sort of a little bit of an outlying year, but it also goes hand in glove with the rand strengthening. So people take this opportunity, but if you think about it, over the last 10 years, the rand has halved in value against the dollar. So I think that's one of the reasons why this is happening, right? And what we've seen longer term is that the rand on average have appreciated just under 6%. So just purely on a currency basis, I think it's going to continue. Secondly, of course, what we've seen recently in the market or in the economy and in South Africa is a lot of negativity. So a lot of micro and macro negativity, which obviously make people feel uncomfortable, and they want to de-risk by diversification. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, I think one of the most important reasons why this is happening and why it would continue to happen is we have very good advisors in South Africa. We've got very good financial advisors, and the financial advisors have been advising South African clients for the last 2 decades to diversify. And it's good, sound advice, not only from an onshore, offshore perspective, but on all aspects of financial planning. And therefore, I see this trend continuing. So what you find is that short term, it might have an effect, like we're seeing right now, 2022, 2023. But longer term, it's a mega trend that I think will continue due to those factors.
Do you think that more financial advisors are also being encouraged to do more offshore investment, and why that is? I mean, we see an increase in the number of financial advisors too that are encouraging their clients to do offshore investment. Do you think that that's a trend that will continue?
100%, and I think it's a push and a pull, right? So on the one hand, it's financial advisors giving the advice, the diversification advice. On the other hand, is that the clients are demanding that, right?
True.
They want that exposure, and so I remember when I started in this industry too many years ago, for me to like to remember, but there was a large contingent of financial advisors that said, I don't go there because it's not my space, it's not what I do. But I think nowadays, if you're a financial advisor in a South African context and you don't understand international offshore investments and many other aspects of offshore, it's going to be very difficult for you to deliver to clients what they want to fulfill their needs. So for those reasons, I think it will continue.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, thank you. So what's also interesting that we've seen with the Reserve Bank flows in another country, specifically, and I suppose this is more of a feel-good transaction coming into the country. So what we're showing you now are the capital transfers, specifically by non-resident individuals, into and out of South Africa. Now, it's very clear, if you look at the brown line, that is steadily increasing year on year. And these are very large numbers. So we're looking that 2023 is going to project to do 23 up to 22, 23 billion rand into South Africa, specifically for property transfers by non-residents. What's interesting about this is when you look at the line of the white line at the bottom of the outward flows, that remains consistent. So we don't see, despite Eskom and other challenges, we don't see those properties being sold and those funds then externalized, which is really interesting. So question for Andreas first. I think a lot of people would be surprised by these numbers because, I was when I looked at the stats. And despite the challenges that South Africa has with the riots and load shedding and all that sort of thing, why do you think we are still seeing non-residents consistently investing in property in South Africa?
I think there are many reasons, but the reasons I hear basically every day for a lot of years. I think firstly, obviously, the value they're buying, the properties they're buying, the quality they're buying, the magnificent landscapes are unique in the world, and the price connected to it is unique. So I think that's number one. Number two, a lot of people who first time come to South Africa, they either don't like it or they really fall in love with it. There's nothing in between. And I hear this a lot of times. We touched down and I felt at home, and that has been a repeating message I hear. And then I think, there's a lot of cash in the world recently, so a lot of young couples looking for a life change. I do think often they want to offer their children a better lifestyle. Water sports, outside sports, and all the opportunities they can offer. So I think that's definitely a big reason. And then potentially also the Americans, I do think they come into the market now, and they have specific reasons, all the reasons I said before, but sometimes also negative reasons why they want to leave the USA. So I think these are some main reasons, but...
Okay. And Alexa, from your side, why do you think foreigners continue to invest in South African property?
Yeah, so from my perspective, and certainly from a property perspective, the story is very positive. And I see on a daily basis foreigners, like you say, falling in love. They arrive here, and everything, just from the people that they're surrounded by, the lifestyle, the trail runs. And you must forgive me, because my vision is a little bit tainted by what goes on in Cape Town. And you're talking about South Africa. And, it paints a great picture of the constant investment. And I can see, daily we get phone calls from overseas. We're planning to come down. We're looking for a property, looking for a wine farm. So... I think that it's going to carry on increasing. We've got so much to offer, value for money, especially considering our exchange rate. So it just becomes even more attainable for them. And certainly in their own country, with the same amount of money, you can afford an apartment. So it's a completely different lifestyle and value proposition. And certainly in South Africa, we do have our challenges. But I think that abroad, they've got their challenges as well. So a lot of these big decisions are based on sentiment, and it's an emotional decision, and people fall in love with South Africa. What's not to love?
And even touching on that, you mentioned Cape Town, obviously, and then that's where you're operating from. But, Andreas, and we were chatting about it earlier, where we're seeing areas like Hoedspruit, Nelspruit, huge influx of non-residents buying property there. The weather's great. It's not expensive then for the exchange rate. You've got airports there where they can fly straight in internationally. It's just so convenient. So
the bush experience is unique to Africa, right? You can't get it anywhere.
Right.
So I think that attracts a lot of people.
100%. Okay. And then Alexa, just quickly, we saw the total property sales by foreign buyers in the last 12 months. We looked at 3.3 billion rand with an average price of 4.6 million rand per property, which is significant values, but do we see them bring their wealth with them to South Africa when they purchase these properties?
Yeah. So I think before we get to that, I'd just like to add something, because it's quite interesting to note that from a prop stats perspective, transactions are down on last year. So what has impacted on that is South Africans buying, the whole move, the semigration move, people moving to Cape Town. There are a lot of people in Joburg and Durban that can't sell their properties. So I think that's impacted on Western Cape prop stats. But the values are there from the foreigners. And I've definitely noticed that the foreigners, we operate in a high value space, and, probably 75% of our buyers are foreigners. So it represents a high percentage.
And that wealth element, so do you see
So,
them bringing that in?
and we had a discussion earlier, I was chatting to Andreas. I think for a lot of the foreigners, it really represents a tiny little drop in the ocean of their global wealth. And I don't think that they would bring all their wealth here. And certainly, if they're going to buy a property for 45, 50 million, it is it's almost, call it their gambling money. For risk-averse people, they would bring in money, buy their property, have this extraordinary lifestyle, send their kids to excellent schools, and have the best of the best living here. But I think that most of them retain their money offshore. And also alluding to the fact, that white line, when they sell their properties, they tend to invest it in property again, or they keep their money in South Africa, especially given the exchange rates. It wouldn't make sense to crystallize a loss and send it back again.
Yeah.
I mean, we say to South Africans that want to diversify offshore, enjoy your lifestyle, enjoy what you have here, but let your money immigrate.
Yeah.
You don't have to immigrate, let your money immigrate. And I think the inverse is almost sort of true as well.
100%.
Yes, I'm a foreigner, I'm from Germany or Switzerland or wherever. I wouldn't necessarily bring all my wealth here, but I would like the lifestyle, and I'm happy to invest a little bit of money in here, or some money in here, but certainly I'm a global citizen and I want to keep my money in safe places as well. So I think that's a sort of a common theme, actually, if you look at the advice, that's the financial advice that these clients would be getting also from their advisors.
I think certainly you've arrived and you're living the dream if you're living in South Africa and earning hard currencies. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, what I see, they bring in 3-4 million. That's their spending money, right? That's their living expenses. But we're not talking about how they're moving their wealth into South Africa. No, they don't.
Yeah. And Alexa, tell me, I mean, over the years, has the demographic or classification of those non-residents in South Africa shifted, or is it still the same? Where does that fall?
Yeah, I've seen, just based on the stats that were put forward, I've also recognized in our dealings with foreigners that there has been an increase from Russians, from the UAE, but the Germans, the Swiss have always been investing, and those numbers continue to come through. And a lot of my interactions are with Swiss and German families.
Yeah. And mostly retirees? Are you seeing younger families? I mean, we were saying earlier, the schooling is amazing for them.
Lots of young families, which is so positive.
Yeah.
It really is, sending them to all the local schools.
I can only confirm that. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, it was retirees. Now it's really young people, remote workers, partly startup money. They sold the company, they're financially independent. And then schools like the Green School in Paarl, or somewhere between Franschhoek and Paarl, attracts very international people who only really move there because of the school. But it's much younger than it used to be. Yeah. Much, much younger.
Very interesting. Okay, and then we talk through, for non-residents coming to South Africa, we look at home loans, right? Because now if they're buying properties, what we see, and we've went and got the stats around this in terms of what is available to them. What's interesting is we see specific banks seem to be targeting the non-residents in terms of helping them with the home loans. Investec coming out top there, with over 100 million rand in the last 12 months. And then ABSA, Standard Bank, and from there shrinking. But it's interesting to see that there may be a strategy around this segment for some banks on the lending side. But Alex, I mean, you come from that space, so what are there restrictions? What is the regulation around non-residents coming in lending? I mean, are they able to just lend?
Yeah, so I'd say that the South African banks generally have a healthy appetite towards lending to foreigners. So typically that would be your 50% borrowing restriction. If you've got a work permit, you can go more than 50%. Investec actually has a product which allows foreigners to lend up to 70%, and they do that through Investec Mauritius. It's very interesting for me just to note these, because from last year when we did the same analysis, Investec weren't up there. So it's really indicative of lending appetites and specific strategies that they've obviously deployed. And I know that they have a very client-centric approach. And they've got a team that specifically deals with foreigners. So hence, they're right up there.
Yeah.
We work quite closely with one of the mortgage originators, and I just asked for her sort of ideas on who were the most aggressive, tying in with these stats, and she said ABSA and Standard Bank are up there. Yeah.
But I presume the majority of foreigners that's buying properties here are not borrowing money, right? They bring
so that's
cash.
the reality.
They're cash buyers, right?
They're all cash buyers. So, when they're choosing to spend, whatever they're spending here, it's a cash purchase. There's certainly, and certainly at our interest rates, it wouldn't make sense to borrow.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, Andreas, you help these non-residents come to South Africa and relocate here. And I mean, what are the challenges around that? What do they see as a challenge in coming here? Do we make it difficult for them, or is it easy?
Look, I mean, it depends. The answer obviously depends a lot on individual circumstances. But for the sake of generalization, I usually think there are three areas. The one is obviously the visa, immigration, home affairs side, and I can elaborate on that a little bit. The other one is potentially later on the bank account problem, especially if their visas are pending, because the bank account's getting close, and I will maybe say a little bit about that in this forum here, because I don't think it's very fair what South Africans or banks are doing there. And then the third one is more a practical one, that they're really surprised that if they want to renovate the houses or they want to do something, that it's very strange that nobody calls them back if they inquire. That's something they have to get used to. But I do think that's more a Cape Town thing than a Johannesburg thing. But starting with the visas, obviously, yes, that's a consideration. It's a problem. The South African missions overseas in general are not very friendly. They treat you quite hostile. And one could expect that if you invest 50 million or 20 million, even 5 million, and you move your family here, that and you create jobs, or you have a good, well-paid jobs, you transfer skills, because these are all requirements in terms of the immigration, that you would be treated a bit more friendly. And then recently, obviously, a lot of spouses of South Africans or permanent residence holders, they face a major problem in South Africa because our Minister of Home Affairs decided not to process these applications anymore. So some of them are waiting for 18, 20 months for an extension, and the banks are just closing their accounts while they put them on hold without notification, and that's where it becomes really, really difficult, because the banks are enforcing something for Home Affairs, but Home Affairs is the ones who are causing the delays, right? And while a month might be still negotiable, if you're waiting 18 months and the minister doesn't dedicate any resources, it becomes a serious problem, and it endangers actually a lot of foreigners, and they feel unwelcome. And I think that's initially they come to South Africa, they fall in love, they buy a property, they move their family here, and then that immigration is usually a little bit of a downer, because it's quite treacherous. And I do think that professional advice there is very helpful. And then the bank account. But otherwise, I don't think there are many obstacles. I think actually, as a matter of fact, South Africa makes it fairly simple for foreigners to they can buy shares, they can invest here. You can do a lot of things. So I don't think there are many hurdles.
Okay. And then South Africans moving abroad, so going the other way. There's obviously the common jurisdictions we see over the years: Australia, New Zealand, Canada, UK. Do you see any change around this jurisdiction? Where are the main jurisdictions do you see South Africans going to? Has that shifted and changed?
So in preparation of this, I looked at just Google search patterns, right? So that gives you always a good indication where people are going. And it's not a big surprise. It's still the UK, it's still Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Actually, Canada not that much. USA, because it's just the biggest economy in the world. So these are traditionally the big markets. But we do see a little bit of a shift. So yes, the Portugal golden visa, the passport route was popular. I think the market for South Africans who just buy other passports is very small, and there's a lot of international players now with Pam Golding and others obviously swimming in that market. And as a matter of fact, from an immigration perspective, there's so much smarter versions and so much cheaper versions to get a residence overseas and even enable your children to study overseas, because that's mostly the reason actually why a lot of people want the passport, right? But what I see is that from a professional point of view, Germany is actually surprisingly popular. The Netherlands is extremely popular. Amsterdam, because it's English speaking, it has lots of tech companies, and Ireland as well. So for young South Africans, because all the tech giants of America, their headquarters are in Ireland, in Dublin. And so you have a chance of an extremely popular and very successful corporate career. And so Ireland is popular, and Germany as well. And then for retirees, there's a lot of people going to France because it offers a lot of options. Yeah, so that's, but in the end, the big countries are still the ones you already mentioned.
Okay. And Alex, I mean, we see, especially lately since COVID, I mean, every country around the world has their challenges. But how has this impacted South Africans? You know, I mean, we all very patriotic, regardless of where we live in the world. Do you see South Africans moving back? Has that shifted at all?
Yeah, every now and again we have a family. I've had a few from America. You know, I think with what's going on there, the shootings and police brutality, we were chatting about it earlier as well. I mean, it's quite horrific. So a lot of them are moving back. I'm dealing with someone at the moment that's moving back from Australia. So I think it's also a different cycle in life, perhaps as well. Because I know for myself, you know, when my kids are out of school, you know, things change. And then you think, where are my children going to study? And then you plan your life around that. So, but I think that if you're South African, you always want to be home, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, so the next thing we want to have a look at just quickly is just around the top 10 nationalities of these foreign buyers buying property in South Africa. And this was just to give everyone an idea of where that sits. So it's really interesting. Germany coming out way top there. So we're looking at 30%. The UK, 26%. And then Russia, which is a surprise over the last 12 months, that shifted a lot, a huge increase of 11%. And I think, Alexa, you touched on that earlier. We have seen a big increase even in the property space on the nationalities coming from Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do they find a challenge? I mean, in terms of coming to South Africa and getting the funds into South Africa?
Well, I think that some banks are sort of Russia friendly.
Okay.
So certainly if there's an international aspect to the bank, they can't accept funds from Russia.
Okay.
So that certainly dictates who they would bank with and bring their funds through.
Okay.
Yeah, no surprises from Germany. I think half of Camps Bay is from Germany. And
Somerset West.
Yes,
absolutely, yeah.
And you can see the US has climbed too, so that number has got bigger, as you were saying. I know Andreas was saying he's also getting a lot of inquiries, and you were saying there's a common trend there with the US inquiries.
I think if I look at this, my prediction would be that Russia is a once off or twice off. I don't think it's a continuous trend.
Yeah.
And I think the United States will overtake them very, very quickly, because I just see it in the inquiries. We're getting swamped with Americans want to come to Africa, not necessarily South Africa, but obviously South Africa is one of the by far most attractive markets. And I think they're only getting ready now. It only becomes hip now. So I do think that the American market is a very interesting one to target.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, slightly different topic. So this is something that we've discussed quite a lot in the wealth industry in particular. And what we're showing you here is specifically inheritances. These are inheritances coming into or out of South Africa. So you will see the white or cream bars. Those are inheritances of South African estates going to beneficiaries abroad. And what you can see over the last few years is how that has increased. Okay. And I think the key here is really about how many beneficiaries of South African estates are now sitting abroad and what happens to those funds once the beneficiary receives them. And I'm going to pose this to Cobus. This is obviously a big concern in the wealth space, but can I ask you just to touch on this? I mean, how does this impact the wealth space? There are various different elements to it. But can you just touch on this in terms of how this is going to impact the South African wealth industry overall?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a mega trend that could have been predicted, right? Because you have a lot of people that left the country over a sustained period of time. And so eventually the parents or the patriarchs are dying off, and so the inheritances, flow. The kids are all over the world. So, but it's as if the wealth industry has woken up to this all of a sudden. Because I can tell you, I'm getting lots of inquiries, and I know of a lot of things that are happening in the wealth space where wealth managers are investing a lot of money to make sure that they can deal with this. Because you can imagine, if you're a wealth manager, whether you're a corporate or an individual, you risk losing clients effectively. And so, you know, with that comes a lot of complication, because if a son or a daughter is inheriting the money that's based in the UK, now from an advice perspective, life changes quite a lot, and you have to be very careful of things like regulation, understanding the tax environment that those people operate in, and so on and so forth. I mean, a great example is, forget about investments, just South Africans that have life insurance in South Africa, they die and their kids are the beneficiaries of a South African life insurance policy. That kid left, never officially left. Now that money pays out into a South African bank account because the insurance company will not pay it overseas. How does that beneficiary get hold of the money? And that's why we've seen, and I think we'll see more, product development happening in the insurance industry, for instance, where it's no longer necessarily just going to be rand-denominated life insurance that's going to be made available to South Africa, but rather potentially hard currency life insurance. And there is actually already products on the market for that. That makes the payment of the beneficiary overseas a lot easier if you structure it obviously correctly. So it's got a huge impact, but it's got an impact also, I think, both ways. You know, it's not just about advising the South African with the offshore beneficiaries, but it's also, can you, and to what degree can you get involved in the beneficiary's life, and what is that impact on the longevity for you, and how do you advise as an advisor that intergenerational transfer that inevitably always has to happen. So it's a huge impact, and hence the reason why I think, you know, the upskilling of financial advisors is critical. And obviously why we published the book, you know, The Practical Guide to Offshore Investments, to give those nuggets of information to people, and to, I mean, you can never have all of it in a book, and the practical experience is obviously sometimes a lot more valuable, but at least it highlights certain elements, you know, that you need to take into consideration. And the two golden threads are exchange controls and tax. Those are the two major things. You need to really get a grip on that if you're an advisor, because these things are going to just become more and more prevalent in your day-to-day practice.
Yeah. So this is such an interesting topic. So I have another question for you quickly. So, I mean, we're looking at the flows when inheritance is paid to a beneficiary sitting offshore from a South African estate. But what we often come across too is where that the offshore beneficiary inherits a offshore asset that was within a South African estate. The regulation changed where, you know, the beneficiary can put that asset into their own name without having to report it to the Reserve Bank anymore. Before, you'd have to do that application before it was changed, and there was always a sticky point, and a lot of people didn't know that they needed to do it, and it became very admin intensive. Now the Reserve Bank's saying, don't worry, SARS can see it, put it in your name and include it in your tax return. But the key there was, at what point do you build that relationship with the beneficiary? So if you are the financial advisor for the deceased, obviously before they were deceased, how do you build that relationship with the beneficiary so when it gets to that point, they don't want to withdraw that offshore asset? Because that's the trend we see. So most of them are withdrawing it, not keeping it, because now they're living in a different country. That's quite a big challenge, I think, for financial advisors in South Africa. Anything you can add to that you think is...
No, absolutely. So I think that is the key. You know, people often think that financial advice is investment advice. And financial advice is not just investment advice. Investment advice is only a part of it. And I think some of the other panels actually spoke about that potentially. And I know some of them write books on this topic. One of the key things of financial advice is estate planning and intergenerational planning. So if you have a client and you know they have beneficiaries overseas, you should put those plans in place now already and already alert them to the complications and the issues that they're gonna face should that thing happen. And that is the ideal opportunity to build the relationship with those beneficiaries now rather than waiting until the event. So I think you make a very valid point. But if you know, again, I think we've got very good advisors in South Africa. And if people follow the financial planning principles, of which estate planning is a very important leg, then they should be capturing that and they should be aware of it. And I think as financial advisors in South Africa, you don't be afraid of because I think that's also what happens. You say, I don't want to deal with that guy that lives in Germany because I don't know how to deal with him. But I think you should make it your business to understand it and to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I mean, and also be big enough to obviously say if you can't assist. But I think there's definitely ways and means to do it. But again, tax and exchange control regulations come into it in a big way. Just one other point though is South African tax residents getting offshore inheritances. And so again, you know, there's advice. There's a lot of pitfalls when you have a direct offshore investment. And there are various solutions and products on the market that you can use, but you need advice. So you need to sit down with a financial advisor, plan it carefully, and make sure that you're not just transferring a bank account into your own name with potentially hundreds of thousands of pounds sterling or US dollars or euros in it, and it just lies there and it creates all sorts of headaches for you. So you know, dealing with this type of thing is I think very important, and it's just going to become more important going forward.
Yeah, and you're so right about that exchange control element too, because I think what we see a lot is that people generally don't understand what their residency status is in accordance with exchange control.
Yeah.
They don't understand it. You know, in their mind, if they've lived overseas for 20 years, they've lost their green barcoded ID, then they're non-resident.
Yeah.
You know, that's
which we know is a lot more complicated than that.
Right, and that's I think where a lot of people get stuck, and then they're not sure how to address that or how to figure it out. So I think for financial advisors to understand that space better is a huge benefit and value to their clients too.
Yeah, and I think the problem is there's a lot of misnomers out there. There's a lot of stories, and because, you know, offshore, we forget that exchange controls were relaxed the first time in the mid-90s, right? This is almost 30 years. So it's a long time.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of legacy stuff and legacy misnomers and stuff to deal with. So yeah, I'd say just get yourself updated and make sure you know what the latest lay of the land is around these things.
Yeah, okay, good advice. Okay, the next slide we're going to look at is around that immigration. So we've touched on inheritances where beneficiaries are abroad, and this slide is a little bit of a up and downer. So here we're looking at specifically the BOP category 530, which speaks to immigration. So here we're looking at South Africans who have completed their tax migration and are moving money in and out of the country. So you'll see what's the main one we want to look here at is really that brown line, and that's the outward flows. And we know and understand that the previously named financial immigration, which was your application that you did through the Reserve Bank, is now referred to as tax migration, but will both fall under this category. So that change in legislation just moved that application process away from the South African Reserve Bank and placed it solely with SARS, which we actually are quite enjoying because it means the Reserve Bank has more capacity, so that's been great. But effectively, when you're doing this process, you're ceasing to be a tax resident in South Africa. And there's various reasons as to why you would do that. And we can chat about that a little bit. But I think what I wanted to just cover here really was so many South Africans have moved abroad and so many foreigners are coming to South Africa. We've established that and we've chatted to that. In your industries, and we can start with Alexa, how do you find that landscape changing, or how has it impacted your industry?
Yeah, I think that property is quite unique because every climate and environment creates the need to buy, sell, etc. So, you know, with the foreigners coming in, it's created, a huge, especially in the high end, sales have increased, and with people immigrating as well, it just creates that movement. So for us, any movement's positive, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay. And for you, Andreas, I mean, have you, the way we see the flows happening through all the charts that we've seen, how has that impacted your industry?
Look, obviously, as an immigration company assisting foreigners coming in and South Africans immigrating, we benefit. Obviously, the more people move, it's better for us, right? But as a business now itself, I think there's a very dangerous trend here, and that is that the foreigners coming in, and we talk about, are mostly people who do not participate here in the labor market. Okay, so they might set up a business, but normally they retire. That's the foreigners we talked about, not the one who gets sent by Vodacom for 4 years here to work. But the South Africans who are leaving are usually young and highly educated. So what I see in my own business, because that was obviously your question, is I see already a massive problem with the skills shortages, and it's only going to get worse. And in Cape Town in particular now, it's aggravated by Amazon or other players moving in, paying very high salaries, and then a lot of South Africans also working now for overseas companies remotely, sitting in Cape Town, earning dollars and euros. So you have massive trends of highly educated South Africans working for foreigners, a foreign company outside, big corporations moving in, paying very high salaries, and then South Africans leaving, and the foreigners who are coming in are not replacing these numbers. So I think the South African economy has a massive, massive skills problem, and it's only going to get worse. And nobody's not really talking about it. And the Department of Home Affairs is definitely not doing enough to counter that. So I think for business, and I see it in my own business. I mean, years ago I could get very, German young, highly qualified people, and they would work for 3 or 4 years because they wanted to, enjoy Cape Town, and then they go back. They work now for Amazon for a lot of money because obviously they pay better and they have all the training, and you can't blame them. But and I'm not the only one who struggles with that. So I think that's quite worrying.
And I mean, just on the South Africans moving abroad, is that highly skilled visas are being sponsored by the businesses? Because we know South Africans are generally sought after in terms of being hard workers, and we've produced some amazing talent and very educated people. Is that because it's not easy for us to move abroad? I mean, unless you've got a British passport, or I mean, so
it's
what
actually
is the
very
trend
easy.
there?
It's very, very easy. And it's financial industry, IT. I mean, the gates are opening up. Europe doesn't have enough working people. And Germany now is opening for unskilled labor. If you're a truck driver, soon you can go to Ireland, you can go to Germany, and that's only the start. Hospitality sector. South Africa has no clue what's going to hit them. The Europeans will look for labor in Africa, and they're going to look here first because we're by far the most educated society or economy or diversified, what do you call it. And they're all going to look for labor here. And they're all going to go because you're going to earn euros, right? So, and you don't have to have a foreign passport, and you don't have to have special skills anymore because they're looking for even low-skilled labor. Germany has proposals now in November. They're going to drop the minimum salary thresholds for foreigners. They're looking for people not even with matric. They have trade qualifications and they can immigrate.
Sure.
So just imagine what that means for us here, living here, trying to get people, to help us.
It's very positive for those that thought they didn't have options abroad, but very negative.
It's not very good for the country, and nobody's talking about it.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, so do you, just on that topic, because maybe some of the audience would have heard of this as well. There was talk at some point of South Africa launching a sort of a migrant visa for people who want to be digital nomads or whatever the case
so that's
may be.
coming.
Is it still on the cards?
Yeah, so the Office of the President has obviously instructed the Minister of Home Affairs to do this, and Ramaphosa has already mentioned this twice. Okay, so it's coming, they're working on it. Also, South Africa has now introduced the Trusted Employer Scheme, so they do work on things to make it for big corporates. For highly skilled, they make it easier, but the numbers don't match the trends I just tried to explain. I mean, there is a massive gap between the trends. So and I think one of the biggest mistakes was South Africa was very wise. They gave permanent residence to foreign students who graduated at South African universities in certain skills, so engineering, IT, etc. And unfortunately, they reversed that due to political pressure, because obviously that youth unemployment is very high. So I understand that. Yeah. While I understand it, it's still not good for the economy because of the skills gap. So there's certain things they need to go back to, but yeah, it takes a long time. And I think it needs a lot of pressure from the public to maybe not Home Affairs, but the Office of the President, the DTI, because they usually see these trends a bit earlier and a bit more urgent.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Cobus?
Yeah, look, I mean, the immigration is a big topic. It's a massive opportunity in the financial services and wealth management space. And you can really go and look at the whole spectrum. And if you're a financial advisor, there's a huge opportunity for you to potentially specialize, and actually add a lot of value. I'll give you 2 examples. If there's someone who's taking up some of these opportunities that Andreas is talking about, and now he's temporarily overseas, he's earning money there, who's helping that guy with what is the exchange control? What is the tax implications? How do I save that money? Do I have to repatriate? Do I not have to repatriate? So there's a huge opportunity. It doesn't mean because someone is going to go and work in Germany or in the United Arab Emirates or wherever they go, lots of people go to the Middle East as well, that all of a sudden they're just gone for you. So it's an area of specialization that you could consider and really focus on that and actually use it as an opportunity. The other one is of course, clients emigrating, and I think the numbers are not always as vast as the media sometimes portrays it. But there is a big opportunity there because those clients need advice. And they need, so let me give you a real practical example, and I'm sure the audience will relate to this. The go-to solution for South Africans investing overseas is an offshore endowment. A lot of clients invest in offshore endowments. Now, the problem is the minute you emigrate or you become a South African tax non-resident, those endowments are structured specifically for South African tax residents because the life insurance company pays the tax on your behalf. The minute you become a non-tax resident, you don't want to be paying tax. So you need to be restructured. Massive opportunity for the wealth industry, massive. So, and then I haven't even spoken, and we haven't even touched on, what about these foreign clients of Alexa and Andreas that come to South Africa and want advice here? So there's also an opportunity. And it doesn't mean that it's advice on their foreign stuff, it's advice on what they're doing there. So I think it's a massive opportunity, and I think we often get very much sucked into, it's negative, and this is the end of South Africa and all this type of thing. But in chaos there's opportunity. So that's how I would approach it.
And I mean, you're a co-author of the Practical Guide to Offshore Investments. I mean, we spoke about it earlier around the trends. Do you think that based on what we're saying and the flows and the change in the opportunity, that the offshore investing trend, as you said, will continue? How do you see that playing out in the next year or 2? I mean, not even long term. Will that continue to increase? Do you think that the bulk of our clients with the wealth to externalize have done it, or do you think there's still opportunity sitting there?
Look, I think a lot of money has gone out. If I look across the industry, there's some wealth managers that sit on books that are up to 80% diversified, which is a lot. But there's still some that's sitting in the sort of 40 to 50% space. But again, as I said earlier on, we've had the relaxation of exchange controls now in place for the last 30 years, roughly. Not quite, but almost there. Very often, and I see this, and I'm sure you see this as well, people stare themselves blind around new money that's flowing out. But what they forget is that there's a lot of money that's already overseas. And it just amazes me, for instance, how many clients or advisors I get in touch with who comes across clients that, for instance, still have direct share portfolios offshore in their own names. which creates a whole host of issues. So just that topic is a massive opportunity to talk about. So in the wealth management context, yes, new money flowing out is an important element, but also restructuring existing things. And then we must never forget that planning, financial planning, tax planning, these things are not one-off events. They evolve all the time because laws change, people's circumstances change. So it's a continuous opportunity in the wealth management space that's there for the taking.
Okay, thank you, Cobus. So we're going to wrap up there. I think in conclusion, we agree that there is opportunity. Looking at the flows in South Africa, although our landscape is changing within South Africa, there's opportunity because we are now global citizens and no longer South African citizens. And so that creates opportunity in the wealth industry, which is very exciting. And seeing so many non-residents coming to South Africa is sort of a feel-good transaction for most of us. Thank you very much to all the panelists for joining us today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks.